NFTs. It feels like every day I see people screaming into the uncaring void. What the fuck is going on? What is an NFT? None of this makes any goddamn sense. If only someone cool and sexy would explain what all of this means, perhaps in an easy to understand video essay on YouTube. And I agree, PhilosophyTube should do a video on this stuff. But in lieu of that, I suppose I'll have to do. Some of this is going to get a little bit mathy, but I'll do my best to explain any terms that might come up that the average viewer might not understand. We're going to go over what the blockchain is, how it works, and why this whole thing is the dumbest idea since trickle-down economics. Ready? Let's follow that white rabbit and do some analysis. Welcome to the blockchain, Mr. Anderson. That line's not actually in the movie. I checked, it's not there. Anyway, before I can really delve into the blockchain, I do need to give a very brief primer on cryptography. If you already understand hashes and keys, feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp on screen now. Imagine a mathematical calculation that is incredibly easy to perform, but incredibly difficult to reverse. As an example, if you were to take two large prime numbers and multiply them together, the resulting number would have only two prime factors, those two large primes. However, trying to find those two prime factors would be incredibly difficult. A supercomputer calculating for longer than the universe has existed wouldn't be able to do it. This process, and others like it, are called hashing, and the result is called a hash, mostly because trying to undo it will turn your brain into hash browns. Now, imagine that you have two very large numbers. These numbers have a special relation to one another. When you hash your input data with one of the numbers, the resulting hash is what we call encrypted. You can't read it. It's completely hidden. But here's the special part. If you then hash that result with the other number, it turns back into your original message. These numbers are called keys. One of them is your private key, which only you know, and the other is your public key, which everyone knows. These two concepts, hashes and keys, are surprise tools that will help us later. Got it? Good. Let's get going. The blockchain is a decentralized database for transactions, people buying and selling. Transactions are stored in a block, and those blocks are stored on the blockchain. And by decentralized, I mean they keep a copy of the entire goddamn thing on every single computer connected to it. Now, to the creators' credit, they did propose an algorithm to cut down on disk space. But still, let me tell you a story. For you see, long ago, in the ancient period of the late 70s and early 80s, before the internet, there was the ARPANET. And on the ARPANET, every computer had a file called hosts. Hosts was a text file that had the name and address of every single computer on the ARPANET. And whenever a new computer was added to the ARPANET, everybody had to update their hosts file, usually by manually downloading it from Stanford University's FTP server. Eventually, it got too big and too bulky to stay decentralized, and in 1983, it was replaced with something called the DNS. How the DNS works isn't super important. The point of the story is that the host file became too big and unwieldy to stay decentralized, but the blockchain, which is much bigger and much more complex than the host file, still remains on every single goddamn computer on the blockchain. That's right, they literally recreated a problem that had been solved before the internet existed. But anyway, onto blocks. What is a block? A miserable pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you! Blocks are objects that contain a hash of many transactions, and it also contains a hash of the previous block on the chain. So, starting from any given block, you can work your way backwards one block at a time all the way to the beginning of the blockchain. This way, you can trace your transactions and make sure that they're all legitimate. Whenever a new block is created, the first transaction on the block will mint a new cryptocurrency token depending on which blockchain you're working with. So, for example, whenever a new block is created on the Bitcoin blockchain, the very first transaction on that block will be to mint a new Bitcoin. There are only ever supposed to be 21 million Bitcoins, but production of Bitcoins has slowed down so much that that limit won't get reached until 2140. And to get around that, people just made new cryptocurrencies like Ethereum and Dogecoin, making that initial limit on Bitcoin completely meaningless. But how is a block made? Well, it's mined using a process called proof of work. And here's where we really start to go down the goddamn rabbit hole. In proof of work, anyone trying to make a new block will generate what's called a nonce. A nonce is a random, unique number. Once a nonce is used in a block, it can never be used in another one. So a user will hash the nonce and see what comes out. If the hash meets certain obscure requirements, such as starting with a certain number of 0 bits, or pleasing Beelzebub with its blood sacrifice, then great. If not, the user moves on to the next nonce and tries again. When a user finds a nonce that works for the block, they broadcast the block to every other computer on the blockchain, which begin to validate the block. That is, they make sure that all of the transactions on the block are legitimate and that there's no fraud going on. If the block is valid, it's added to the blockchain by users just working on the next block, which will have a hash pointing back to this block. And if it's not valid, then all that work and electricity just goes down the drain. If two blocks are validated at the same time, the blockchain will split in what's called a hard fork. And whichever fork has the more computers working on it will become longer, and the longer fork will be deemed the correct fork, and all of the users working on the other fork will switch over. This way, the blockchain stays consistent. Now, this process of creating nonces, hashing them, and checking and validating is all very energy intensive and complex, and it is so by design. The idea is that anyone trying to overtake the blockchain would have to expend such a massive amount of energy that the power bill would outweigh any potential profits. I'll talk more about the actual feasibility of this kind of security later, but that's the idea. The thing is, though, all that computational work on the nonce, finding a valid hash, eating up massive amounts of electricity, destroying the environment, that has nothing to do with actually making the block. Making the block takes far less power. The only reason they keep running these nonce calculations is to win the right to create the next block. If more people are mining, they make the requirements for the nonce harder so that the same number of blocks come out no matter how hard you work. Just like real capitalism. Okay, but hold on. Maybe we can just tweak this then. If it's not actually required, maybe we can do something called proof of stake instead of proof of work. Proof of stake is much simpler, really. You get a few trusted individuals who are willing to put their own money on stake to become validators. These validators will be randomly selected to propose a new block to be added to the blockchain, and they'll broadcast the block just to the other validators. The other validators will attest that the block is legit, and when enough validators attest to it, the block gets added to the blockchain. The validators get rewarded, and any validators who either slack off or try to attack the blockchain lose the money they put up at stake. Simple and clean, right? Well, not really. Proof of stake solves the environmental problem, but it doesn't deal with any of the other problems with cryptocurrency. Let's talk about money. Specifically, we're going to talk about two different kinds of money: commodity currencies and fiat currencies. So a commodity currency is a kind of money where the value of the money comes from the value of what it's made out of. So, as an example, gold coins are valuable because they're gold. Sheafs of barley are valuable because they're food. Humans have been doing this kind of currency for over 100,000 years. In German prisoner of war camps in 1945, the prisoners used cigarettes as money. It's important to note that they weren't bartering. Trades weren't accepted, and the price of everything was listed in cigarettes. The cigarette was money. Now, commodity currencies can undergo inflation, but remember, their value is tied to the value of the commodity underlying them. And when that commodity is used, it's taken out of the market, and the currency undergoes deflation. After all, gold can be melted down for its metal, barley can be eaten, and cigarettes
can be smoked. Fiat currencies are different. They have no intrinsic value at all. For example, the Canadian loonie, the $1 coin that's minted in my hometown of Winnipeg, has nothing to do with the brass and steel that it's actually made of. Instead, the Canadian government went, this is a dollar. It has value because we say it has value. And everyone just went, okay, sure. Because only the Canadian Royal Mint can issue Canadian dollars, be they loonies, $5 bills, or numbers on a computer somewhere, everyone accepts that a dollar is worth a dollar, and they use it to represent economic exchange. In other words, the Canadian dollar is backed by the government going, dude, trust me. Now, it's very important to note that fiat currencies have no use value. A use value is how something is used outside the market. So, for example, the use value of bread is that you can eat it. The use value of air is that you can breathe it. And the use value of Celeste by Extremely OK Games is that it turns you into a trans cat girl. Yeah. And because fiat currencies don't have this, all of their value is contained in their exchange value. How much is something else you can get for it? Okay, technically, they do have a use value, but nobody's melting down loonies for the steel. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies are fiat currencies, no matter what the crypto bros say. But instead of being based in trust in a government or a bank, they're based in trust in the security of the blockchain. Problem is, the blockchain isn't actually that secure. In a real bank, you typically have some kind of fraud insurance, and if someone steals money out of the bank in an epic movie heist, well, typically that's a loss for the bank, not for their clientele. But under proof of work, the blockchain is defended by the hope that the computers of honest users overpower the computers of attackers, which requires that users continue to mine for new proof of work. And what would happen if a computer did overpower the blockchain? Well, the second and final line of defense for Bitcoin is that the creator deliberately made Bitcoin more profitable to continue to mine than to steal other people's Bitcoins. That is, he literally just crossed his fingers and hoped that anyone who takes it over will have expended enough energy that it's more profitable to just keep going. If you kill the boss, you become the boss. And proof of stake doesn't solve this problem. All it does is consolidate power into the hands of whoever's able to put up a bit of money. All an attacker needs to do is put up enough crypto or hack enough validators. Plus, you know, it pools money and thus kind of defeats their entire decentralized point because it just centralizes it just like a real bank. So cryptocurrencies aren't secure enough to actually be used as currencies, which is why they're not. The exchange value of a real currency is tightly controlled by the government and central banks to keep it stable. You don't want the price of a dollar changing from day to day. Cryptocurrencies, on the other hand, have no regulatory body, which makes their exchange value volatile. Their price can fluctuate wildly from day to day. So, most miners are using cryptocurrency as a speculative asset rather than a currency. They mine Bitcoin, they wait for the price to go up, and then they sell it for more than they bought it for. The Gravel Institute did a really good video on this. I'd recommend you check them out once you're done here. But, alright. Maybe I'm being too harsh. I mean, as scammy as they sound, cryptocurrencies do make some kind of sense if you interpret them very generously as a libertarian wet dream version of unregulated free market capitalism instead of an outright Ponzi scheme. But, like, you can do that. Surely nobody would make it worse, right? Oh, dear Lord, help me. So, currencies are fungible. That means that every dollar, gold coin, or Bitcoin is exactly the same as every other dollar, gold coin, or Bitcoin, at least as far as the market's concerned. The bank doesn't care if your $5 bill is covered in Dorito dust, and the vending machine doesn't really give a shit if you're buying your Mountain Dew using a commemorative coin from the Vancouver Olympics. A dollar is a dollar is a dollar. They're all the same. This is something different. Let's take a block on the blockchain, and instead of putting cryptocurrency transactions on it, let's put a different kind of transaction on there. Inside this transaction is a non-fungible token, or NFT, representing something else. That something else could be a GIF, a tweet, a video, in-game loot from one of the many bullshit video game companies jumping on the shitty bandwagon, pretty much anything. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the NFT. So a block contains an NFT. It'll also contain two other pieces of data. One that says who created the NFT and one that says who owns it.
This will usually be the creator's public key and the owner's private key. At any time, the creator can use their private key to prove that they created the NFT, and anyone can use the owner's public key to see who owns it. So okay, that works pretty well. If you ignore the massive amount of environmental damage that NFTs cause under proof of work. Most NFTs are stored on the Ethereum blockchain, and Ethereum keeps promising a switch to proof of stake, but they never commit. Meanwhile, Ubisoft's new NFTs are stored on a proof of stake blockchain. But the thing is, it's kind of a moving goalpost for NFTs. Because if you start talking about proof of stake versus proof of work, then you're just back to talking about crypto in general, not NFTs in particular. The real problem with NFTs is that the token is completely meaningless. It's got zero use value, just like any other block, but it's not a currency you can use for transactions like Bitcoin. It's just a representation of a digital asset. A big selling point of the blockchain is that the data stored there can't be altered. But remember, the data contained on the blockchain for your shiny new NFT isn't the actual digital asset. It's just a representation of it. It has a hash of the asset's data and a link to wherever the asset is actually stored. Problem is, if that actual location goes down or changes, you now own a token proudly pointing to a 404 file not found error. And because of the blockchain, this token can't be updated. And speaking of that asset, even if it does remain up, more often than not, the asset itself is publicly available. This means that the actual use value, whatever the use value of a shitty picture of a monkey might be, is available to everyone, not just whoever bought the NFT. It is extremely important to me that you realize that when you buy an NFT, you are not buying the digital asset. You're buying a digital certificate with no legal backing that says that you own the original, quote unquote, of an infinitely replicable digital asset. That certificate has absolutely no use value, and outside of the current NFT bubble, it has no exchange value either. You might as well just go print out your digital Pokédex certificate that you get from Professor Oak at the end of the game on your Game Boy printer. At least that'll give you some bragging rights.
A thing can be a use value without having value. This is the case whenever its utility to man is not due to labor. Such are air, virgin soil, natural meadows, etc. A thing can be useful, and the product of human labor, without being a commodity. Whoever directly satisfies his wants with the produce of his own labor creates, indeed, use values, but not commodities. In order to produce the latter, he must not only produce use values, but use values for others, social use values. Lastly, nothing can have value without being an object of utility. If the thing is useless, so is the labor contained in it. The labor does not count as labor, and therefore creates no value.
By the way, even if the asset were literally stored on the blockchain, there's nothing an NFT can do that a regular database can't do better. But that doesn't stop Square Enix's president from releasing a stupid as hell New Year's letter, where he said that these tokens were, quote unquote, met with a great deal of enthusiasm by a rapidly expanding user base, and that he expects to see an eventual right-sizing in digital goods deals as they become more commonplace among the general public, with the value of each available content corrected to their true estimated worth. That is never going to happen, because that value is literally zero. But you know what? I could go on about this letter, but the Jimquisition has already done a video about Yosuke Matsuda, and they threw in way more profanity than I could ever throw at Shinra. Sorry, I mean Squeenix. No, I'm interested in a different question.
So, why the hell do people keep buying this shit? What the fuck is going on? At least with a stock, which is, capitalism central, you still get the use value of being able to be a shareholder in a company. But NFTs are just like the perfect encapsulation of how divorced from reality the market and capitalism has become. People are paying absurd amounts of money for a digital certificate that doesn't do anything. So why? Well, some of it is just money laundering, but frankly, most of them do it because they don't understand how it really works and they think they can make a profit off it. The entire value of Bitcoin as a speculative asset depends on how much electricity it takes to make. It has to. Otherwise, the amounts of power used and the power bill that results from that would outweigh the benefits of mining and everyone would just stop. But because proof of work keeps getting harder the more people join in, speculating on cryptocurrency is betting that the same currency will be more wasteful to make tomorrow, making the waste of today a good investment. This is a borrowed observation, sources down in the doobly-doo. If proof of stake were adopted like the crypto apologists keep prophesying, this waste future speculative market would be gone, and with nothing backing it, the price of cryptocurrency would plummet. It might become useful as an actual currency again, but all of the people who've invested so much time, money, and computer hardware into cryptocurrencies as speculative assets have a very strong incentive to keep hard forking away from any proof of stake integration because they stand to lose their fortune if it happens. Buying something and then selling it on to someone else for a higher price while they only buy in at the hope of selling it on to someone else for an even higher price? There's a word for this kind of scheme. It's a pyramid scheme. It's just straight up a pyramid scheme. And while getting involved in a pyramid scheme is really, really stupid, people do stupid things all the time. Neither I nor anyone else can stop people from doing stupid things. If you want to buy an NFT, go right ahead. I can't stop you, and neither can anyone else. Just understand what it is you're buying, what it costs our planet to produce, and what it is that you're likely to get out of it. Bupkis. You know, like, yeah,